You are listening to the Antler and Featherco podcast. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Antler and Featherco podcast, the podcast for new and adult onset hunters. My name's Vince, and it's no secret that I'm a newer hunter who is on a mission to learn absolutely everything I can about this wonderful game we call hunting. And as I'm learning things, I want to just pass them right along to you guys. So today we're going to be talking about the majestic white-tailed animal that we all love to chase and hunt. This animal has changed who we are and the very way we live our lives, not to mention our bank account status. Ask my wife. I don't know about you guys, but hunting consumes my life, and it's what I'm thinking about at least 90% of the time, especially as we start approaching October. And as I was thinking this week about strategy and different ways to hunt, I noticed one glaring area of the game that I realized I haven't really spent much time trying to learn about and understand as a newer hunter. So have you ever really taken the time to learn about the animal that we're chasing? Like, have you really taken the time to understand biologically what they're doing? I think we all have our own ideas and experiences with white-tailed deer, but how well do we actually know them? Do you understand what biologically causes deer to behave in the ways that they do? Do you understand what's actually happening during the rut besides just standing up and yelling, "They're cruising for chicks"? Do you know what the entire breeding process looks like from start to finish? I know I don't, and I'm really interested to learn a little bit more about it. So today's guest is a wildlife management biologist with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and I'm hoping by the end of today's show, we're going to have a much better understanding of what drives deer to do the things that they do and the way that they do them, which is ultimately going to make us more deadly in the woods. So with that, please welcome to the show, Curt Kemmerer. Curt, how you doing, man?
Hey, very good, Vince. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned in the intro, I don't feel like I know as much about deer as I should. As much as I love to hunt them and I love to think about how to hunt them and woodsmanship and everything that goes into it, I think I owe it to the animal to at least get to know them a little bit better and kind of understanding why they do the things that they do. Like I told you before, we're going to say a quick prayer and then we'll hop right into it. All right. Lord, I thank you for today. I thank you for another opportunity to record a podcast. And most of all, I thank you for Jesus. I thank you for what he did on the cross in our place. We wouldn't be able to sit here and do the things we do and enjoy the things we enjoy without that. I just want to glorify you through this podcast, first and foremost. And I thank you for Curt. I thank you for his time and his willingness to come share all the things that he knows with me. And hopefully through this podcast, we can get more people into your creation and enjoying the things that you created with your very hands. So we ask that you would be over this conversation, that you would make it fruitful, educational, entertaining. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, Curt. So just so people can kind of understand who you are, let us know kind of who you are, what you do with Iowa DNR, and then kind of your general hunting background.
You bet. So yeah, as you said, my name is Curt Kemmerer. I am a wildlife management biologist with the Iowa DNR. I'm based out of Maquoketa, Iowa, and I actually work at what is known as the Maquoketa Wildlife Unit. I cover 6 counties in east central Iowa doing, I guess, general wildlife management activities and public lands management. The public lands piece is really a big majority, I guess, of my job. So managing wildlife by managing their habitat on our public lands. But I do get involved in disease management, wildlife surveys, some of those other general wildlife biologist type duties too. Got into this field because of my passion for the outdoors and for hunting and fishing. I grew up with it. I was very fortunate in that regard to have, folks in my family that did that. My dad, my grandfather, uncles, that whole thing that, it's very easy to recruit someone in when they grow up into it. And
Right.
Again, I feel very, very blessed. And often I kind of need to remind myself not to take that for granted, I guess, because not everybody kind of grows up with it and just kind of falls into it second nature. Some of us have to work a little harder at it or get into it later in life. And all I can say for all those people who are doing that is good for you. You will not regret it. What a great way to spend your free time doing something fun, healthy, exciting, something you can pass on, and something that, you can, I guess, will never go out of style, in my opinion. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that touches on, if you are new to the show, like I said in the beginning, I didn't have a family that hunted. I didn't have friends that hunted, and I had to get my degree from YouTube University, and so this podcast has been awesome for me. I wish I would have started it like as soon as I started hunting, because I would be so much further along than trying to figure it all out. I mean, I look back at my first season of hunting when I was, I could not understand, what am I doing wrong? Why can't I see deer? And now I look back and I'm like, oh, there's a million reasons and a million things you did wrong. You're hunting whitetail, you're not hunting mule deer and elk, and it's all this. So it's great to be able to get someone like you on here to, explain at the very basics the animal that we are chasing. And I think that had I known a little bit more about what deer or why deer do the things they do, I probably would have been able to at least see more deer my first year. So just to hop into it, I want to start with something very basic. One thing that I had a hard time understanding, and which really affects the times I went out and hunted and how I was, or what I was doing in the woods at those times. When do deer generally move? So when are they generally on their feet, like heading to feed and coming back to bed? So what's the general day like for a deer?
well, I guess I'll start by saying, there is a reason why most hunters, hunt that first light and last light kind of thing, because that truly is, those are those peak times. They really are a dawn and dusk type animal. That seems to be their highest levels of movement during the day. Now they can move at any time of day, and you've probably learned that. All of us hunters have that. Sometimes you're surprised, like, wow, why is that deer up and moving at noon, or whatever
Yeah.
the case may be. But there's certainly truth to the old adage of being out there before shooting time, and staying out there until just after shooting time and slipping back out, because they are going to move, I think, most heavily during those two periods of the day. As far as the rest of the day, they're probably gonna go in bed and sit there and chew their cud in that mid morning to late morning time period. I've always seen where deer do get up, and they go on little forays during the day. They're not just going to tuck away and not move all day long, typically. And that can certainly change throughout the year too, as hormones change, as food resources change, and as the weather changes. There are so many factors that you cannot pigeonhole a deer's movement into just kind of a standard playbook, because as soon as you think you can script it, they're going to go off script. But in general, that early morning and late afternoon, early evening, that's the key time.
So would they technically be considered nocturnal, or what do they actually fall in? Because it seems like, I mean, trail cam after trail cam after trail cam shows you that my big buck shows up, but he doesn't show up anytime other than 3 in the morning, 1 in the morning. So, you hear the term, he finally daylighted. We finally caught him in daylight.
Sure.
What are they actually considered?
Well, right. Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, if I remember right, back to the old textbook, the textbook term would be crepuscular, meaning that dawn and dusk. They don't fall into strictly diurnal, where they're out during the day like some of our animals are. And they're sealed up tight at night, or really vice versa. They're not strictly nocturnal either, as we all know. I mean, otherwise we'd never hunt whitetails.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, they can be active at all times of the day, but they're crepuscular, meaning kind of that low light type animal is when they're moving the heaviest.
Yeah, they didn't teach me that term in science class or biology class.
Yeah.
So last week on the show, I had Dan Infault on, and we were talking about big mature bucks specifically, and he had mentioned that through his observations and trail cams and stuff, it seems like these big mature bucks are only sleeping like with their eyes closed, maybe like 10 minutes in the day. Does anyone even really know like how long do they sleep, or how does a deer get rest and sleep? Because it does seem like even when they're bedding down during the day after they've been out feeding all night, it seems like they're still head up, eyes are open, they're alert to predators and things like that. So when do they get rest to like survive? Do they not require the same type of sleep restoration that we do as humans?
They don't. Yeah, they really don't. That's one of the first things that everyone should know is that, yep, they don't have to go and get a solid block of sleep like you or I do. I mean, they're a prey animal. They have to make their living surviving out there with predators, or at least they evolved with predators. They may not have too many predators anymore other than man, but still they are they're a prey animal, and so they rest a little differently than we do. Like you're saying, when they're laying their body fully at rest and relaxed, I guess they're getting that rest and rejuvenation they need without actually altering their brain patterns and going into a deep sleep like we do.
Man, they don't even need caffeine. What a
Yeah,
life! What a life that would be.
yeah, it sounds exhausting probably to you and I, or at least it does to
Right.
me. But yet again, they're just they're obviously physiologically very different than we are.
Yeah. What is the difference in the way that does bed and bucks bed? So I think we we know that they go out generally. It seems like at nighttime to go feed and whatever they do at night. When they come back to bed, I'm kind of curious just about, like I said, the biological reasons. Does tend to bed in groups or with a couple doe. Bucks will generally, for the most part, they're by themselves. Why is that? And is there difference in the way does choose bedding versus bucks?
Well, my understanding, Vince, is just that, does in general, they just they're wired a little bit differently. They have more of that herd instinct, I guess I'd call it. I'm sure there's probably a scientific term that's escaping me here, but they have more of those um, matriarchal lineages and some of those family lineages that they actually kind of stick with for many years or throughout most of their life. So they're not opposed to that group activity, whereas bucks, of course, they're kind of wired a little differently. We all know that at times, in the spring and summer, you might see those bachelor groups, but certainly that's changing by now and will continue to change and ramp up and be very different, all through the fall and into the winter. So yeah, they're kind of looking out for number one. They're looking out for themselves, whereas does, I guess, maybe, I don't know, maybe they're smarter. Maybe it's a lot like maybe it's a lot like people
Yeah.
sometimes, those
Yeah.
yeah, that they're a little wiser than us, that they see the advantages to the many eyes, many noses.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that that's the part of the reason that they evolved that way. Safer in number, safety in numbers type of thing.
Right. Yeah, I kind of wonder if there's not, like, I would like to know from an evolutionary standpoint where that, if it's always been that way, or where that split happened and why. Because uh it seems like doe, anytime I found doe bedding, it's in areas where they could be much more easily approached by either a hunter or a predator. They're not as concerned, it seems like, with just wherever they're bedding. They're not as concerned as being found as a buck will be. And that'll be kind of one of my next questions with bucks particularly. But does anyone know, is there an answer to that question of when and why did bucks tend to kind of do their own thing? Because I mean, I wonder if it has anything to do with hunters in general. I mean, you got everyone's chasing a big buck versus people are just kind of doing doe management. So I don't know. That's a really tough question to throw your way.
No,
But,
nope. And there are certainly things, that I'm not going to be able to answer because I'm not an evolutionary biologist, or I'm not an expert on deer evolutionary science. So, but I think you're right on the money with where you're going. That a lot of times you'll find doe beds. You'll see several of them in a cluster, in a group, and it's just kind of out in the open, out in the middle of nowhere in particular, that you don't think, well, this doesn't seem all that secure. But again, I feel like that plays right back into that. Well, if there's multiple eyes, multiple ears, and multiple certainly noses, They don't need to tuck away somewhere totally inaccessible to have some of that security when they have that group. Whereas the buck, and again, without getting into, I guess, why that happened eons ago, why their behavior is different, it just seems to carry true through a lot of the males of species. The ungulate species, hoofed mammals, they all tend to do that. The males are a little more solitary, and so I think they know that. I guess that's the way they're wired. So they are going to look for those spots that give them that security they need. Hey, something's got to approach me from this direction or that direction, and I'm going to use the wind more because they don't have a buddy or five watching their back for them all the time.
Right. Yeah, and that kind of leads into my next question with bucks. So we've established does don't care. Come at them. They'll see you. They're gonna run. They got friends. But a buck, whenever you do find a buck bed, they can be difficult to find, and they seem to change frequently depending on wind direction, depending on things like that. What kind of features do you typically see with a buck bed that would make him choose that area?
Well, I guess I think of first and foremost that heavy cover, like whether that's kind of shrubby stuff, that some downed treetops, like when I think of when we do some timber stand improvement or even a timber harvest, with all the tops and stuff that are left, when I look at that mess in the woods, I think there's bedding cover. So that's what comes to mind for me, I guess, as a hunter and as a wildlife biologist. Is that they want that heavy cover where they can kind of disappear. But, like some of the wind factors come into mind, at least in my mind, that, they're going to want to be somewhere where they're not, out there where the wind is howling and it impacts their hearing or their ability to nose the wind. They want to kind of see, if you could have something behind you, like a wall behind you and an open view in the front, and you can kind of catch that passing breeze as it wafts by your nose, that would be ideal. We have places in Iowa that have pretty good terrain, and you might see that where they're on like a bench on a hillside. But a lot of Iowa is pretty darn flat, and you don't really have that terrain. So then you might be looking more at just those cover features, that thick cover that they can kind of bed up against, one side or another, and then face the other direction and use the wind to their advantage. I've always thought, right or wrong, because I don't know if this is truly always right, but they want to be able to look one way and kind of smell the other. So, that's something where they might put that wind at their back, or just at least a crosswind. They're going to sort of cover more area that way, with using their various senses.
Yeah, that was kind of one thing I was thinking as you were saying that from like a scouting perspective. Um, Typically, are they? I guess there's no way to really know, but have you kind of seen that? Yeah, they tend to, if the wind is blowing to the north, would they tend to be facing north so that, or do they tend to kind of back themselves into where nothing's going to get my back? I guess you kind of said maybe a crosswind where they can kind of catch a cross. I don't know if there's like a perfect answer for that.
I don't know that there is either, Vince. That's again, probably 10 different people would give you 10 different answers on this. So I think that they're going to try to use that wind to where they can, like I said, watch maybe one direction or a couple directions. They have a pretty wide field of view. Again, a biological thing there with eyeballs on the sides of your head. They see differently than we do with eyeballs right from the front of our head. So they're going to see a pretty wide field of view. But then if they can also use that wind, kind of at their back or from a quartering direction where that's not so easy to see, it's kind of like they have eyeballs in the back of their head then,
Yeah.
so to speak. So yeah, I mean, it really depends. I couldn't say that, well, they like to bed this way in a north wind or this way in a south. I don't know that so much matters. The weather changes so frequently in Iowa
Right.
daily. So I think they know their home turf. They have their home range. And I think they have these key spots selected throughout their home range where they know that, yeah, under this kind of condition, the leaves are making a little bit more noise and stuff today. I'm going to go down here where it's calmer, quieter, and I feel more secure versus on a bluebird day with hardly a wind, blowing type of thing. Well, I might be able to lay out more up in this open area or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and when you mentioned down trees and stuff, we had that derecho come through a few years ago. That in the public lands that I particularly hunt, so we're talking like Scott and Clinton County in those areas. Man, I remember I went out scouting and the woods looked one way, and then that thing hit, and I went back, and it was like a whole new world. There were so many trees that fell over, and so now it's like when you're thinking of like, okay, typically where I hunt, it's flat. Like you're really not looking at any elevation whatsoever. So now it's like, all right, possible places bucks could be bedding, and you look through it's like everywhere, you know.
Yeah.
But is there? So this is a little side question I wasn't gonna ask, but how do you, from a DNR standpoint, when something like that happens, do you typically just kind of let it lay? I know you guys can't really go in the woods and remove things. Like how do you plan to deal with things like that? You just, that's the terrain now?
Well, it depends. We do have some ability to go in and do management activities. We can do what's called a salvage harvest, and we did prescribe some of those on some of our public lands following the derecho. In fact, some of those activities are still just finishing up. Here we are a couple of years later. But so yeah, if we have a bunch of downed trees, that's a public resource that some of that cover and stuff is very good for wildlife. Don't get me wrong, it did change the way the forest looks in some of those areas. But also, some of that is, I guess it's a resource that's going to sort of go to waste in some ways. So if we can salvage that, turn around and put that back into the property, which is exactly what we do when it comes to our forest management, any of those timber harvests, even a salvage harvest after a disaster, we turn around and put that back into forested properties for public hunters to enjoy, for the wildlife to use. So it's that we have that latitude, I guess, if the situation calls for it, we can go in and kind of pick and choose what sort of methods we're going to use and what kind of plans we're going to prescribe for those areas. We did some removal of some of that debris material. In some cases, on some wildlife areas, we left a majority of it. So it's kind of a case by case situation, really.
So back to our deer, we were talking about the wind. We were talking about their nose. Can you kind of explain what is happening with a deer's nose, especially versus a human nose, as to why it is such crutched, or whatever you want to call it, to a hunter? Like, the deer's nose is what gets you most of the time. What's going on with their nose is different?
Yeah, I like to think of it as one of nature's true, miraculous sort of things. Some of the noses on some of our mammals, whether it be a deer or a bear, or I mean, there's several, of course, instances, but deer is kind of the one we have around here that we think of that is just it's a machine. And I don't think you or I or any human being, for that matter, could even wrap our heads around that information that must be coming into a deer's nose. I mean, it's just incomprehensible, I guess, to us. So I've read different sources of literature that say, they'll prescribe a number to it, Vince, like, oh, it's 20 times more powerful than the dog's nose, or it could be 100 times, and I don't know what to believe on that. So I don't like to throw numbers out there. All I can say is it is darn good. So I think you take your bloodhound or whatever, the best dog nose you have, whatever bird dog has been the best bird dog you've ever been around, and I think the deer will easily match it, or better. So yeah, pretty amazing tools they have. And of course, they're really probably their number one sense that helps keep them alive in the woods.
Yeah, I can't, like you said, it's hard to even comprehend. I've heard it explained that, well, Dan last week, he said, a deer, we would smell a cake, where a deer is going to smell every ingredient in every layer of that cake. And it's like, it's just so hard to think, like, what is that even like? How does your brain even figure something like that out? But like you said, something's going right with it, because that's the number one thing that we try. Everyone tries to fool it. We try to spray ourselves down with stuff. We wash our clothes a special way. People take showers. I mean, the hunting industry, in terms of scent control, I was watching a video earlier today of this guy's, like, he's putting together his field bag, and he keeps tossing in product after product, and it's like scent control wipes, scent control full body wipes, scent control body wash, scent control toothpaste, scent control spray for your boots, scent control laundry detergent. And it's like, even if you did all of that perfectly, and you went and you got, like, John Eberhart has those suits that have like carbon in it and all that stuff, and you got your ozone thing going, I still don't think I wonder how much of it is coincidence versus actual, like, making a difference. Because it seems like if they can truly smell that well, what the hell could you possibly be putting on your body or washing off your body that they couldn't figure out? If they can smell that you were there hours ago, days ago, whatever it is, it's one of those things where it's kind of how much of it's for the hunter versus the deer.
Well,
I don't know.
yeah, very, very well said, Vince. I mean, I guess I would tend to agree with your last guess that you referenced about the minute, little idiosyncrasies that their nose must be able to tease out that, again, we can't really even comprehend. We think of them and really almost any animal as being pretty simple-minded, and they are to a degree, compared to our brains and the way we think and the way we work. But yet, that simple brain of theirs is set up to do one thing, and that's survive. So they're really tuned into their senses. And I think he was right when he talked about the particles in the cake. I mean, I think that deer, if it scents you on the stand, it's smelling your clothing, it's smelling your sweat, it's smelling what you ate for breakfast that morning, it's smelling the toothpaste variety you use to try to cover up your breath. I mean, what you walked through on the way from the truck to the, it can smell your car air freshener, just all those things. I mean, and who knows how they interpret it, but they know that none of it is good,
right.
None of it's natural. So they know those things. Now, like you, it sounded like you were getting to the point of, or making the point that, can we really fool that nose? And my personal opinion is that we can't. Maybe there are things that help or kind of confuse and mask things a little bit, but again, my own personal opinion is that there's really no fooling it. If you're unfortunate that the wind swirls just the wrong way, or it gets in behind you, whatever the case might be, I think you're toast. So
yeah,
I don't know. I have a lot of years, at hunting myself. I started deer hunting when I was a middle school kid, a junior high kid, and so it's been a long journey, and I continue to learn something, and see new things every year in the woods. I by no means have these critters figured out, and I'm certain that I never will. But it's amazing how sometimes I think they have me pegged, when they're 100 yards away. And there have been numerous times where they come in, less than a half an hour after I crawled into the tree, and they stand there and smell the ladder rung that, I climbed up on, and or even lick it. They'll sit there and lick your metal ladder and stuff like that. Kind of, look around, flick their tail, and just go about their business. I mean, they have no idea that you're standing 15 feet above their head. So
yeah,
it's, to me, and I guess I should preface that by saying I don't do all of the above and beyond scent control things. I've just, I'm not advocating for or against it in any way, shape, or form. That's my personal choice, is that I don't really do all that. I try to keep my hunting clothes kind of separated. I'll keep them out in the garage and just kind of in like a plastic tote and stuff, so that they just keep that outdoor scent on them, when I sit out in the woods for several hours, and then I put them back in the tub and kind of keep them there until the next time I wear them. And that, to me, is good enough. I just let them ferment in their own outdoor odors all year, I guess, right or wrong. But, again, I have deer come very, very close to me every year. And most of the time it seems like it's no big deal. I think I'm above that, or above that scent cone, and just kind of the wind is taking the scent away. But, all it takes is one wrong switch of the wind or something to happen where they move into the right place, and they know exactly where you are, and they're out of there, kind of thing. So,
yeah. The most interesting thing, well, first of all, I wanted to, one little funny thing I find is people do these scent control regimens that are absolutely off the wall, and you see them, they use every product in the book, and they get into their stand. They made sure they walk the right way, the wind's the right way, and the first thing they do is crack open coffee and some beef jerky, and it's like two of the most strong smells that we have in our world. And you're like, not gonna smell me. Here's my Folgers. That, I mean, you can smell coffee as a human on the other side of a building, especially if you're caffeine deprived. You can really smell that stuff. But no, I was gonna say it's funny because we worry about scent so much and playing the wind. And I mean, if you've been in a tree around a deer in the wrong wind, you know exactly what's going on. They know you're there. They know something's up. However, and I'm gonna make you go on record as a professional with this one. Deer, turkey, whatever game animal, they know that it is hunting season for them. Because if you get into turkey season, I can't count how many times I'm sitting on the ground in a tree, not worrying about my scent, not worrying about wind, not a care in the world, because I'm hunting turkeys, and you'll have deer 5 feet in front of your face. I mean, so close you could reach out and touch them. I shot a tom opening day this season, and part of that story, I had a group of 3 deer literally come 10 yards in front of me and feed between me and the tom for about 20 minutes. And I had to sit there still for 20 minutes. And it even got to the point where I started calling to the tom to keep him interested. And the deer looked at me and they heard me. Rap, rap, rap. They looked at me and then they went right back to it. And then they went out and hung out next to the tom for 10 more minutes. And it's like, if this was deer season, you would have been nowhere to be found. But it's turkey season. So your official opinion, do they have a calendar or something? Like, what's going on?
Well, I guess I'll just say maybe they're not as simple-minded as I said.
Right.
Huh? Yeah. You're exactly right. I think they do feel that they feel that pressure. They know when it seems to happen more regularly, when people are invading their woods and invading their bubble. And I think there is something to that effect of they kind of know that, it's a different feel to it in the springtime. And we've all bumped deer, turkey hunting. So it's not like they're not going to be afraid of you if the condition is right. But you're right. You're exactly right that sometimes they amaze me too, that, they tolerate certain things more at some times of the year than the other times of the year. Maybe it's just an individual deer thing too, when it comes to that. But
yeah, I didn't know if they have their iPhone calendars marked, and they October 1st clicks on and they get a little notification bell and they're looking, oh, this again for the next couple months. So not to get too far off topic, I'm really good at doing that. When we're talking about deer, and I'm sure maybe it's different between bucks and does, but what is a typical home range of a deer? As a newer hunter, I know that in the back of my mind, if I bumped a deer, it was like, he's gone. He's running. He's actually going to change his residency from Iowa to Ohio. He's moving there now, and I'm never going to see him again. What typically when you do bump a deer, how far are they going? And then, like, what is the general home range of, like, if you do find a buck bedding somewhere, how far is he typically going to move within that range in terms of me trying to find him again? Sure.
Yeah, no, good questions. And so that's another one of those you have to kind of preface about the habitat. I know we're talking here on our home turf in Iowa, obviously, and that's going to be different than, Wyoming or something like that. So, around here where we have excellent deer habitat, excellent sources of food, and a lot of edge, our habitat is very well interspersed in Iowa for the most part. So in those places where you have a lot of edge and just different habitat interspersions, they don't need to have that big of a home range. Again, different sources in the literature will kind of quote, different numbers, but I think a pretty typical range, would be that someone would say a half of a square mile to a square mile. So, they're within a section anyways, I guess most of us think in terms of sections, between the 4 gravel roads kind of thing. And most deer in Iowa are going to live well within that section, sometimes within a quarter section.
I was gonna say, and when you do bump them in that home range, I guess just to ease some newer guys' minds, they're not going to completely pack their bags and find a new home range.
Right. Nope, you're exactly right. Again, they they know their home turf. They know it better than you or I ever will. So, I mean, they know their escape plan when they get bumped here versus bumped there. I mean, they know the terrain. They know where they can run a short distance and feel safe. And, I, as a hunter, I'm sure you have too now in your years of hunting, you might accidentally spook a buck, one day, and, just a few days later, he comes by, you see him again. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, some people may argue that and say, nope, once you bump a big one, you're not going to see him again the rest of the season. Maybe he goes nocturnal. Well, maybe that's true, for some deer. Some of those older bucks are pretty savvy, and I'm not going to sit here and argue and say that they won't maybe kind of start to go a little more nocturnal. Every deer is a little bit different, has a little different tolerance, but I have personally, spooked deer and continue to see those same deer throughout the bow season. So, I think that most of the time it's a quiet enough or, innocent enough little bump that it's not going to completely ruin their world, shock them into orbit and send them packing into the next county. I think they're going to forget about, they're going to kind of jolt away from you and wonder what was that, and then slowly get back to their routine.
Yeah. And you had mentioned Iowa in particular, and like you said, this is going to be different state to state for sure. But what are the main food sources for deer in Iowa? Obviously, we know corn and soybeans; those are the big things. But what else besides corn and beans do deer like to eat in Iowa?
Well, you're exactly right. Agricultural crops are an important part of it. And when you look around the landscape, I mean, look at what we have available. That's, such a huge percentage of our landscape that it's readily available. And when it's in the right stages, it's very attractive to deer. So, beans when they're green and succulent and growing, or corn when it's in the, the silk stage, or there are certain stages where it's more attractive. But again, any hunter that's spent some time in the woods, and hopefully for the newer folks, they will learn this the more and more time they spend, is that, that's not all they're eating. You'll see them, kind of browsing on green leaves in the timber. In the fall, as we're getting to this time period right now, acorns are dropping now, and that is going to outweigh anything, when they're available. So if there's white oak acorns, bur oak acorns on the ground now, they're going to be hammering them. And then it might switch to the next thing, I mean, when that supply starts to run out, if there's some kind of soft mast available, some sort of fruiting species, they're going to, switch to that while it's at its most nutritious. That's one of those things we don't quite, I think, all appreciate or understand, is just how they know that, okay, right now this is more nutritious for my body and this is going to do better for me. So I'm going to hit this until, the weather changes and we have a cold snap, and now this is a little bit more nutritious, I'm going to that. So
Yeah.
They're definitely they're an animal that can take advantage of a lot of different types of food, Vince. And again, I think most hunters know that. You'll see them in alfalfa fields and in clover patches, and they're hammering away on that succulent green stuff. But, again, if they can go up to that oak ridge and up on that flat and get acorns, that's, they're going to do that. So
Do they typically like to hit acorns over corn? Because I have one particular spot in mind that I hunt. So this is a selfish question, but it's lined with a cornfield on one side of the woods, but then all throughout the woods, I was scouting the other day, and as you said, acorns are starting to drop. And yeah, you have your white oak, you have your bur oak. Will they typically transition to acorns from corn when they start dropping on the ground?
I would sure say so. I don't know if there's much that beats an acorn when the timing is right and they're available. I think that kind of trumps everything, in my opinion. So yeah, I think they are gonna switch to that, or they probably already have.
Yeah. I guess this is another question about oak trees specifically that I'm curious. You see years, or you hear that some years acorn or oak trees do really well, and then other years they don't seem to produce at all. Is there a reason for that? Is that just following like just precipitation for that season, or what can cause a tree that's been really good the last couple of years to just kind of die off in terms of producing acorns?
Well, most of the white oaks are actually just naturally cyclic in their production. That's just how the white oak families goes. I guess that's just kind of the way that they evolved, is that they have um, these cycles that they're on. So yeah, it's not at all uncommon. In fact, it's normal, I guess, for them to go on a boom or bust sort of thing. Whereas some of the red oaks are a little bit more of a perennial producer, maybe not to the same extent, when it's a really good white oak crop and they rain down acorns, but typically the red oak family are kind of dropping something every year.
Okay.
So it's just something to keep in mind, and kind of, there's plenty of literature out there about that. Again, that's kind of a known, just that's a known thing, I guess, when it comes to oaks. So yeah, not every year is going to be a bumper crop, but there should be some type of acorn available every year.
Awesome. That is good to know. And that's good to be able to kind of plan, yeah, help plan from year to year. So back to deer again, because I keep getting way off. I'm so curious about just all of this stuff that goes into it. So I'm curious about the breeding cycle. Like I said in the intro, every hunter on the face of the planet, it's the rut, it's the rut, it's the rut. Cruising for chicks, they're just trying to get laid, blah blah blah. What is actually happening with that deer that's causing, like, how do they just know that that time of the year that's what we're doing, and then once we're getting out of the rut, can you kind of explain, once a deer has bred a doe, what happens beyond that with the doe and the whole pregnancy cycle all the way up through a fawn?
Well, so it's really this whole cycle that we all get so excited about as hunters. It's driven by photo period, which is a fancy way of saying daylight. It's driven by day length, and their bodies are triggered. Their hormones, excuse me, are triggered by the changing length of day. So weather is always kind of a somewhat of a factor that we all talk about and think about, but it's definitely not the factor. Actually, you can have hot weather during the rut, and the rut still happens. You can have cold weather really early, and that doesn't mean that all of a sudden the rut's going to move up or something like that. It's not.
Right.
It's Mother Nature has that set in stone that this is when you need to breed, because this is the optimal time 6 months later to drop your fawns. So it is pretty well set in stone and honed over, again, eons through evolutionary process, that this is when it happens. And in our neck of the woods, it happens in early November is typically the peak, because that times out so that at the end of May, 1st of June, those fawns are hitting the ground when they have the best chance of survival. There's the most food available. There's cover. There's, everything that they need to make a go of it and get big and strong and survive and be ready to do the same thing, next winter themselves. So,
Yeah, that's a good way to, I mean, it is the way to look at it, but it's a good way that's never been kind of explained to me, as Mother Nature knows that the best time for fawn survival is X date, which is why our rut falls here. I've never heard it explained that way. And that's kind of why I wanted a little more about it, just because it's something that we all, I think, I don't want to say we take it for granted, but like, it's the rut.
yeah.
We don't care why, we don't care what's actually happening beyond that. Once that rut window closes, like, we don't care what happens with the doe now.
Right. No, that's a good, yeah, you're right. I think, most of us, again, as hunters do think that way. I think we're all a little guilty of that, but no, it's kind of more of a, like a back calculation, you could say, that, and that is why uh the rut that we all love so much, that's why it happens when it happens. And it's kind of the same time every year. Is you're right. It's not just because, well, that's just when it is, but it is when it is, because that's when the fawns need to be born.
I've heard, I mean, even back to when they were starting to shed their antlers this year, you see some people like, oh man, they're shedding early, which means they're going to be in velvet early, which means they're going to be rutting early. And, all these different factors. Like, I had somebody send me a picture of, it was a young buck, but he was trying to mount a doe like a week ago in Wisconsin. And, everyone's like, does this mean the rut's going to be early this year? Last year, I remember the weather seemed to be a little bit hotter later, And yeah, I was like, oh, now the rut's going to be all thrown off. And, you have, you have your half of the people that are like, nope, the rut is when the rut is, period. And the other people are like, no, it can change. It can change. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
glad you explained that actual biological process that sets that off.
yeah,
Um,
you can certainly set your calendar to it, Vince, and all the hunters out there can too. That if you're a a pre-rut hunter or a peak of the rut hunter or just after the peak, I mean that really shouldn't change. You can ask your boss for vacation, for the same week or two every year because it's going to happen. Now, again, I'm not saying that weather doesn't have a throw in a little bit of a monkey wrench at times, but it's no different than I guess if you think of if you work outdoors, say you do a hard manual labor type job outdoors. Well, you have to do your job. You're going to show up. You have to work 40 hours this week. It'd be great if it was 65 degrees. You'd kick butt, and the job would be nice, and you'd really be out there just singing along. If it's 95 degrees, you're still going to do your job. You have to,
right.
but you might be moving a little sluggish and taking more breaks, and so it's kind of the same thing with deer, I guess. Is that what I'm trying to say? Is that there's no such thing as like, well, the ruts. It's really warm. It's 70 degrees, for daytime highs a couple days in the first week of November. So yeah, the rut's going to be back to mid-November, late November now because it's too hot. Well, no, that's kind of a common myth. The rut is still happening, but yeah, those deer might not want to run so hard, or they might not want to just be out and on their hooves quite so much if it's just unbearably hot. So, and just like if it's cooler, they think, well, it's going to happen sooner. Well, not really. I mean, deer might be moving and you might see a few more and you think it's happening now. But again, it's truly the behind the scenes process, the breeding, all that has to happen in that same couple week window every year.
Yeah. And kind of talking about weather, it's very common to hear, you're going to want to hunt specifically for bucks when there's a cold front coming in. What about a cold front seems to get deer on their feet? Is it just simply what you just said? When it is a little bit warmer, they're just kind of they still go feed, they still do what they need to do, but they're not going to do as much of it because maybe it's hot, and then the cold front makes them like, oh, this is nice. Now we can kind of get up and do more. Or is there something even more to a cold front?
Yeah, I think, well, I think it's the barometric pressure, when that changes and drops, that's something that animals have a sense to cue in on, again, that us humans don't, but, they sense those pressure changes and they know when like a front's coming or some weather system. And I think it's another, example of kind of an evolutionary response to, well, because they don't know, is it just going to be cold and windy for a day or two, or is this going to dump, 12 inches of snow? But if you had this innate, alarm clock going off inside you saying, hey, you better go fill your gut right now, because things could get a little bad. You might want to hunker down.
Hmm.
That's kind of what, their body's telling them, I guess, when they sense those changes. But, again, in Iowa, our weather's so dynamic, at least during the bow season. And if we're talking the time frames we've kind of been talking about here for archery hunters, most of the time it's not going to drop that blizzard. We have had Halloween blizzards and stuff
Yeah.
in lifetime, but typically it's not going to be a big multi-day type. All of a sudden the landscape has changed and your hunting tactics have all changed. It's a short-lived thing that they get up, they get moving a little more, but then they kind of go back to normal. So
Yeah. All right, I got two more things I want to kind of key in on just for newer guys to kind of understand, like I said, some of the biological things about deer. I had mentioned shed antlers. So if you don't know what that means, basically your deer grow their antlers and then at a certain point they fall off and then they grow them all over again. Do I guess what could be the reason for that? Why don't they just continue to grow and grow and grow? And then along with that, because they do fall off, why is it that they come in larger every year?
well, that's another unique thing to our ungulates in North America, that they have that ability to grow these bony antlers, and they're deciduous antlers, just like deciduous trees. They drop their leaves, they drop their antlers. So it's different than a horn, and that's why antlers are not horns. They're not a bone core covered in keratin like an antelope is kind of a modified horn, or, you think of a rhinoceros or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a sheath that's made out of the same stuff your fingernails and hair are made out of. That's a horn. No, these deciduous antlers, they're one of the most amazing tissues on earth. They're one of the fastest growing tissues that there is. I've heard that inch a day type thing, that some like elk antlers and stuff will grow that much. Just
Yeah.
they absolutely pump the blood to the antlers. They pump the nutrition. It's a pretty demanding thing, but yet they grow them for that fall breeding cycle. That there's their ability to attract a mate, to ward off competitors. It's again all back to their reproduction and just the way that their species kind of evolved. That here's my antlers, and I'm more fit, I'm more healthy. I'm the one that you should choose to breed with. So,
And kind of evolutionarily speaking, if that's a word, I guess, yeah. So as that buck gets older, those antlers grow larger as more of a, like, obviously for fighting, but it's kind of like, ask a girl, does she want a skinny guy, or does she want the bodybuilder? Is that kind of the same?
yeah, I mean, it is. Yep. As their bodies grow, they are more fit. And so they can produce those larger antlers when they're in their prime. So yeah, it is. It's no different than, a kid, a young boy growing up, and then, getting into high school, college, if you're out for sports and you lift weights and all that. I mean, every male sort of hits their prime at some point when your muscle mass is the greatest. And in deer, it's kind of the same way, their body mass, their antler mass. But just like with us, and then at some point you turn the corner and you start to kind of slide and slip downhill, and deer do the same. They don't always get very old in Iowa, seems
Yeah.
to me, as someone who's out there and works with a lot of hunters and checks a lot of deer and does disease tissue sampling and stuff. I mean, I see a ton of deer during the hunting seasons, and you just don't see a lot of old bucks, because they
What do
get
you
hunted pretty hard.
consider? What do you consider like the age of decline or starting to decline?
I think from what I've seen, a lot of times that 6 years old is probably about, where you've maxed out your potential, and you're probably, if you live longer than that, going to start going the
Mm-hmm.
other way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was funny too. I remember I've been involved in fitness, whether, powerlifting, or I did CrossFit a while back, and you were talking about, how amazing that antler and everything is. I remember when deer antler spray was this huge, like, supplement to take, and it was supposed to, it's coming from the fastest growing tissue on the planet, so spray this stuff on your tongue and you're gonna get jacked. And it's like, well, doesn't quite work. I tried it. but but yeah, so you kind of
But,
mentioned.
that all the whole antler thing is also driven by hormones, Vince. So, I mean, that's again, and it's daylight, that's kind of what triggers that. A lot of people may not know that, but the changes throughout the year and the photo period, tells the deer's body, okay, it's time to start pumping more testosterone, or it's time for testosterone levels to sharply fall off. And that's what happens. There's a hormonal trigger in the spring that starts the antler growth, and that's where you start to see the little nubs start to form out of the pedicle, and pretty soon they're looking a little nicer, and then it starts to branch and turn into the classic whitetail shape covered
Yeah.
in velvet. Just beautiful, when you see those big velvet bucks in July.
Yeah.
And now we're right now at that period of another testosterone level change, where okay, it's time for the velvet to fall off and to polish these bad boys up, because fall is coming. So that's a testosterone driven, hormonal driven thing. And that testosterone is going to ramp up all the way through the fall here, right up through the peak of the rut. And then after the breeding season is open, which is not, I'm not saying right after the peak rut in the first half of November, there are still does to be bred into December. So
Mm-hmm.
it's usually more like, the end of the year, January 1, when it's truly all kind of done. Then there's just this immediate and fairly sharp drop off of those hormones that signals, all right, time for the pedicles to kind of seal off and these antlers to fall off. And I'm going to go into kind of winter survival mode, maintenance mode, and just take care of my body as best I can. And when spring comes around again and days are long and food is lush, I'll start growing these things again.
Yeah, that's I was thinking when you were talking about the velvet, it's like you get these velvet pictures when they're kind of maxed out in size, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a 230-inch deer, and then he sheds and he's like a 130, you know. But
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
but yeah, also, so the last thing I want to kind of go over that's kind of a everyone has heard the term, we all know what CWD stands for, but what is it? So chronic wasting disease. It's really kind of, I don't want to say it's gotten more popular because that's not the right term, but it's a more popular term among hunters, I feel like, in the last few years. Um, so can you kind of explain what CWD is and what it does to the deer?
Sure. Yeah, and it's the awareness. That's probably the word you were looking for. I agree
Yeah,
with you.
yeah.
I think the awareness is growing, and that's a good thing because whether you fall on one end of the spectrum or not, I guess, in your sort of beliefs on CWD, that's not for me to judge. But CWD is real. It is a real disease. It does exist. That much is a fact. You can't really argue that. Where it came from, how long it's been around, all those things, are a little more gray, but it is out there. We have it in Iowa. There's no doubt about that. I'm one of those people out there every year that's testing deer, and we've found this disease. It's on the landscape, and it's going to continue spreading. It's a neurological disease, Vince. So, it primarily these prions. That's what causes the disease, is a prion, and that a prion is a modified protein. It is not a virus. It is not a bacteria or a protozoa. It's not one of those typical things that are, I guess I'll say, alive. So you really can't kill it. It's
Mm.
just a protein. It's a modified in an unnatural or unhealthy way protein. And so when the deer picks up these prions and gets an accumulation of them in their central nervous system, these unhealthy proteins start to change and convert normal healthy proteins into the prion form, the unhealthy form. And as all these proteins change their shape and mutate and become unhealthy, it starts to leave little microscopic holes in that central nervous system tissue. And imagine what a bunch of 1,000 pinholes in your brain will do. It's not going to do anything good, certainly. So the disease starts to affect their function of their body, and they start to slowly decline. And then you start to get those classic symptoms that when they actually become clinical, and if they do develop outward symptoms, they'll be skinny and head might be drooping, ears drooping, salivating. Just they are going to look like a very sick deer. Now, one thing I will quickly say is that CWD has quite the ability to hang around in the environment, because it's not, again, it's not a virus, or it's not a bacteria. It doesn't have to be in a host to stay alive. It can just sit there. These prions can sit in the soil or on plants and be in the environment contaminated for years. Research
Mm.
has shown that they persist for years. So that infectious material doesn't really go away, and a deer can pick it up, and then it has kind of a fairly long incubation period, we'll call it, too, where the deer can have the disease. It can be turn around and be re-shedding those prions, the proteins, out into the environment, creating more source of contamination without being outwardly sick. I think out of all the deer we've had in Iowa that have tested positive for chronic wasting disease, I believe there's only been one that has looked like a classic, sick, like, oh my gosh, look at that deer, it's
Yeah.
got CWD. Most of them look perfectly normal and perfectly healthy because they have not hit that clinical point yet. So it's kind of scary. It's a insidious sort of disease, and it's a true threat. I don't think any hunter should argue that. We need to work together as hunters to do our part and try to slow this thing down as much as we can.
And is there any danger to people, like if you, I guess before you even get to the part of eating a deer who might have CWD, um, in Iowa, what do you recommend? Like if I go out, whatever day it is, and I put a deer down, do you recommend having it checked, or is there a way to have it checked if you as a hunter are curious?
Yep.
I know that we don't have, unless it's, I guess I don't want to say this definitely, but we don't have to check in every deer right now. But what could we do if we are concerned or anything like that?
Yeah, nope, you're right. So CWD testing is not mandatory in Iowa. We're not talking about making it mandatory under normal circumstances. There actually is an example of a special late season in our uh, deer management zones, some of our areas that have the heaviest disease prevalence rates, where if you get a certain type of tag for the extra late hunt, that it is required. But
Mm-hmm.
by and far, I guess, or by and large, for most of us, any normal tag, it's not mandatory. You don't have to check your deer, and some people don't want to. That's their choice. That's fine. But for anyone who's concerned or just simply wants to do their part as a hunter to sort of help monitor the disease, help inform the DNR and future regulations and deer management, is all you have to do is pick up the phone and call one of us. Call me, call your local biologist, whoever you can get on the line with the DNR. They'll know the right person to kind of direct you to. And we're out there taking deer samples and checking for this disease every year. So every fall, every winter, we're out there doing some level of sampling. Now, the good thing is that in the last couple of years, once we've reached our quotas and we kind of start shutting down our sampling protocols, a hunter can still do it on their own. So anyone who's concerned and would like to have that test for peace of mind, for feeding their family and friends, you can still do that through Iowa State's veterinary diagnostic lab. It's not hard to do. We have instructions on the website. You fill out a form, you send off your sample. There's instructions that show how to pull the sample, or someone like myself that is trained to do it, we will help you pull that sample, even if we're not the one sending it in. But the hunter can send that off. It's $25. I know that, that's a cost, but yet that's a pretty minimal cost in the whole scheme of things, with all your deer licenses and hunting gear and
Yeah.
meat processing. And I mean, everything you do, like if it's important to you to know, I would suggest, send that in. But get a hold of the DNR. I would call us first, because we may still have an open quota in your county and we may sample it for you, or we can at least certainly direct you to how to get the sample out and how to send it in and some of that stuff if we've already met our quota.
So is it a pretty quick process? I've got to imagine a lot of people probably just don't do it because they don't want to sit around and wait, and maybe they don't understand. And I know I don't understand, how do you guys sample it? And because maybe it's like, well, I'm not going to wait 6 hours for DNR to show up and then have an hour-long test on this thing. So what does it actually look like for someone who's like, they want to help? I mean, I think all of us hunters want to do the right thing for the animal.
Yep.
So what does the actual testing process look like?
Well, you are right. There is a little bit of a wait involved that very well could be the determining factor for some hunters. And again, I understand that not everybody wants to leave the deer hang, but typically how it works is that once the deer is harvested, and you contact the DNR, we'll arrange to meet with you one way or another, however it kind of works for both parties to meet up. We take the tissue sample out of the throat. We're taking the lymph nodes from up tight, kind of under the lower jaw. Just like if you went to the doctor's office, they kind of felt up high in your throat to see if your glands are swollen, type of thing. If you're sick, we're taking those lymph nodes, and that's the first sort of place where these prions accumulate, or it's the best tissue to sample right now with our current testing available. The best science we have out there in the world that's the tissue we sample. So once the lab has it, it's just a couple days, but again, we have to get the sample, we have to ship it, that takes a day or two. The lab has to get it, and then that might take a couple days, and then get response back to you. Good turnaround might be 5 days to a week. Sometimes if it doesn't get shipped right away, it may take upwards of 2 weeks. So some people have no problem waiting that long. If it's cold weather, or if they bone their deer out, they'll just kind of put it, in a couple bags or a couple totes, whatever, put it in a freezer type of thing. I mean, everyone's set up a little bit differently, Vince. So yeah, it works well for some hunters who have their own space or their own walk-in cooler or all that kind of stuff. Or even if they've sent it to the locker and just told the meat locker, hang on to mine until I've given you the okay. I think, lockers will work with people, but typically a week or so later, you should be able to get results, and then you can proceed.
Yeah, that was kind of my question. Is I typically would have just, and I don't know why, I would have just assumed like can't touch the deer until you guys come check it out. But it sounds like you can go ahead and go through your cleaning process like you normally would, and just if the area that you guys are taking samples from, just set that aside, and that would be good enough for you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most of what we do, I mean, they field gutted it, of course, they take it home, they have it hanging, and then we just need the head. I mean, once we
Yeah.
have the head, we can, kind of extract what we need from right below the jaw. So yeah, it doesn't matter. In fact, some of the deer we get, if it's cool weather, again, this isn't something that spoils. I mentioned that, this prion doesn't, die once the deer
Right.
is dead or something like that. We can sample lymph nodes that are several weeks old if they've been kept cool and they haven't, basically the lymph nodes haven't rotted, as long as the tissue isn't decomposing and turning nasty to where it makes you gag.
Yeah.
We can, I've sampled bow hunter killed deer during the December shotgun seasons just because it's more convenient for the hunter. They'll just say, yeah, no, I just kept the head here in my garage or whatever on the cold floor, and here it is a month later. But if you want to do both my deer, that'd be great. So
Yeah.
yeah, that works. It's whatever's convenient for the hunter. We're going to try our best to work with you and make it as seamless as we can. Again, it's not required that you test, but I think as time goes on, I'm seeing more and more interest from people, wanting to know if their herd is healthy, if their deer had it or not. And so we're happy to try to work with people because we want to know, our deer in this county healthy, or has it spread to a new area? So
Yeah.
that's our goal as the management agency, is to keep a very close watch on this.
And can this be something that can be harmful to people if you do eat meat from a deer who is positive CWD, or if if you're gutting a deer and you've got the blood on you and stuff? Is this something that can jump to a human?
To date, there is no proof that it can. That's the good news, is that there has been no proof that it can. So I think, it's for the most part, we can say that that's not likely. You're not likely to get sick from eating a deer. You cook the meat and all that stuff. Most bacteria and things that are actually going to make someone sick, this like food poisoning type sick, that'll be taken care of just by handling your food properly. But this CWD thing has never been proven to, infect humans, but other types of TSEs, that's the type of disease CWD is, it's a TSE. And there are other diseases like mad cow disease that, have jumped and have
Mm-hmm.
infected human beings. So humans can get TSEs, and, some of the folks out there in the world, in research and stuff, that's their fear in the human health world, is that at some point there's going to be a, patient zero where,
Yeah.
some hunter may get this. It's just, I'm not trying to be the boogeyman. I'm not trying to scare anyone. I hunt deer, I shoot deer, and I eat deer every year. I feed it to my family. I do test my deer. I think that gives me some peace of mind, and it kind of double serves as my role as a biologist. That I
Right.
know that, hey, in my areas where I hunt and stuff, the herd is healthy or not healthy. We've detected it or not. So um, it is a good thing to do, Vince, and I encourage people to do that. Work with your local DNR. We're happy to work with you guys. We're all on the same team. We're all hunters. We're all extremely passionate about deer and deer hunting, and really all types of hunting. I don't know any of the DNR wildlife guys or the game wardens out there that aren't, hunters themselves. So
Yeah.
don't let anyone tell you that we're not, and it's just a job, and we don't really care, because we're out there in the field just as much as the next guy. So
Yeah. And as a hunter, guys, I mean, we talk about conservation, we talk about herd health, we dump millions and millions and millions of dollars into tags and gear and you name it. We're okay with doing all of that stuff in the name of the health of the herd. So why not do this? It seems like it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And if we want to be hunting deer 20 years from now, I don't see a reason to not do this. It only benefits you, the rest of the hunters, and the deer. So if you guys don't have plans on getting your if you don't have plans on getting your deer checked this year, I think you should consider it. I think it's a good thing. I don't see any negative to having them come out unless you poached, because then you're going to get caught, and you should. But yeah, consider doing that, guys. I think that's a great thing that we need to all get behind. And whether or not, yeah, what you said, whatever you believe about it is whatever. But it's an easy way for you to contribute in just another way.
And,
well, hey,
you hit the nail on the head talking about 20 years from now. That's where we need to be thinking on this whole thing, Vince, is that it's maybe not, as we're kind of a newer state, or, some of the, at least in our area, like where I'm located, we're still on the front edge of where CWD is in Iowa. So most of us, it's zero impact to us right now, but I don't think that's going to stay that way. And it's a slow moving train, this thing is. So it may not affect you and me, our hunting, this decade or even next decade, but what about our kids? Or
right.
what about our grandkids? I mean, that's where just this horrible nature of this disease and the herd health implications, really start to stack up. Is, these places that have had it for 50 years, talk to some of those people in those places and see if they think that it's a joke, or that it doesn't have any impact. So
Right.
It may take a long time to get there, but eventually, if we're not careful, and maybe even if we are careful, we're going to get to that point where it is a thing, and it is affecting all.
Yeah. Well, hey, Curt, I really appreciate you taking the time to get on here and tell us all this stuff about deer. I feel like I can't wait to re-listen to this in editing and stuff, because there's a ton of information that I just did not know about deer. And I think it's, like I said, as a hunter, I think part of your responsibility is to understand the animal that you're going after. So yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time, guys. If you have any questions regarding anything that we talked about today, and maybe you're not in Iowa, I can tell you I've reached out to DNRs and different state agencies over the last 3 years, and I hunt a couple different states. I've never had a DNR not answer my question and not go above and beyond to make sure I understand what I'm asking about. So don't just guess on things. If you got a question, reach out, especially in Iowa. If you're in Iowa, the Iowa DNR has done an amazing job getting back to me, getting me the information I need. And that covers everything. That's if you don't know how to buy licenses, all the way through CWD testing. Don't be afraid to reach out to these guys. I know everyone thinks that the DNR is the boogeyman. I think generally they're only the boogeyman if you're doing something wrong. And when you're in good faith and you're just trying to learn and understand things, do not be afraid to reach out to these guys. That's what they're here for. It's a resource for us as hunters to use as well. So yeah. Curt, I want to thank you again for coming on tonight, and hope you have a great rest of your night. And guys, we're going to catch you next week. This is the Antler and Featherco podcast. You are listening to the Antler and Featherco podcast.